In this video, we'll discuss the features on Amy Winehouse's face that point to an open and accessible personality, as well as her capacity to be expressive with her gifts. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to another face reading. Today we've got Amy Winehouse. So if you are new to my face reading channel, please go up here and watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video. That's a very important video to watch if you're new to the topic, so you can find out what it is and what it isn't. If you're liking my content, as always, please like, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and please share my videos with people who you think will find it interesting. It's how my channel grows. That's what I'm aiming to do on the large scale. So with Amy Winehouse, she was a person suggested in the comments, so I am reading her today, and there are a number of things that leap out. So unfortunately, Amy Winehouse passed away at 27 from alcohol intoxication. It looks like alcohol poisoning, but she did struggle with drugs and alcohol for quite a while. She had been in rehab a number of times, and there are some markers on her face that point to that proclivity for people that are going to indulge in substances, that have trouble with substances and addiction. There are some marks in the face that we want to pay attention to, and then some of the auspicious or lucky things in her face that I want to talk about. So first and foremost, I'm just going to talk about the features on the face that can be aligned with addiction and with drug-induced problems and substance abuse of any kind. And in my other videos, I've talked about this a number of times, but something called the death mask. The death mask is where the face looks a bit skeletal. You will see it get hollowed out. So there are some pictures here in her youth. She was very young when she passed, but when she was even younger, before the time of her death, when her face was a bit more supple. You can see the suppleness in her face, and then as the pictures went on, you can start to see where the areas right here start to get hollow. The face looks a little more withdrawn. It looks a little more dried out. And when you see this look of that hollowing look, when you see that happening, especially early in age, when people are in their 20s and 30s, this is not a great sign. It means life force is being depleted. And with the death mask, what we're looking at, the thing to pay attention to is that people have a strong death instinct. Now, the death mask can represent in a pathological sense or in a not so pathological sense. And looking at her life terrain, knowing what we know, the death mask was something that she was struggling with. So people that have the death mask will be addiction prone. They will engage in risky behaviors. That instinct to be close with death and to bump elbows with that veil between the living and the dying, that whole component is all death mask related. Now, some people have the death mask and they can be very good at shamanic work, or they can be very good at spiritual work, or they can be good at things that deal with one foot being in physical reality and one foot being in the spirit reality. So all of that being said, she carried some of this. Her face started to get hollower in the time closer to her death, and that's something to pay attention to. So that's one. Next, she had a wood-featured face in that it's long. Okay, when we see that kind of long rectangular look, that is aligned with the wood element. That's aligned with vigor, drive, and high energy. So a lot of performers, people that are in these kinds of roles that are going to be, performing on stage and doing that kind of thing, are going to need a certain amount of drive and energy, of which she had. So this was auspicious in terms of this lining up with what she was doing with her life force. The other big dominant thing that I noticed with her was her mouth. She had a large mouth. She had big lips, and the mouth is an earth element feature. So when we talk about the earth element, it relates to the 5 senses. You want to think about the mouth as sort of a marker for the 5 senses. And what that means is sensuality, anything relating to the senses, sight, scent, sound, touch, and expression. So the mouth also relates to generosity. And so when we see a mouth on a person like this, who was very creative and who was very big in terms of sharing their music and getting their voice out into the world, the mouth can relate to this as well, because it's about expression and sensing. Many artists are sense-oriented. They're going to be using the senses, whether you're a visual artist, whether you're a vocal artist, but that component of expression and sharing and getting things out into the world can definitely be seen in the mouth. And her mouth was large, full lips, a sensual mouth of sorts. And so this again fits with a person who is going to express into the world. So she definitely had this. Now, she also had very large eyes. So the eyes, as I've said before in other videos, relate to the soul, the gateway to the soul. Many traditions talk about this, the eyes being a portal of entry into the consciousness of a person. So when we see a person with large eyes, when they have big eyes, what that's pointing to is this very open, creative, and expressive nature. So a lot of times people with big eyes can be an open book in certain aspects of their life. They will be very outspoken in terms of sharing about themselves and about parts of themselves. And this doesn't mean a person is a blanket extrovert if they have large eyes, but you want to think the accessibility to the personality when the eyes are large, it runs a bit more that way. The accessibility is higher when the eyes are larger. People that have the smaller, squintier eyes are going to be a bit more reserved, a bit more closed, and typically hold their cards a bit closer to the chest. So with her mouth, when I saw this is that generosity. Okay, generosity being, again, aligned with the mouth, with that big mouth. When you see that, there's definitely something about that giving of the gift into the world. So again, you have to look at features, and then you have to look at what a person is doing. And you're trying to find congruency. And it's not about being psychic. It's not about being predictive. It's about looking at features and saying, what is the person doing? What are they naturally expressing in the world? And is there congruency? Because if there is, the nourishment of our gifts is going to bring about life force. Now, on her face, there's nothing that technically was leaking to the point where I would say, she was destined to die young. What we have to realize is that, when we have addictive tendencies of any kind, you're playing Russian roulette. That means that you're being risky with substance abuse. And anytime we're doing that, that veil between life and death gets very, very thin. And life is already very fragile, right? It doesn't take much to take us out of the world. So that's some of the components that I saw with her. But that big, open, expressive face, there was something very light about her Shen as well. There was something expressive and dynamic, and something that definitely was a draw. And so, we look at people's faces, and again, if I were to look at her face and not know who she was, would I say she's destined to be a singer? And this feature means that she's got an amazing voice, or that she's lyrically inclined. That's not how it works. And that's not the way I want you to think about face reading. It's always about looking at features and finding congruency with how they're living, and then finding where are they not expressing what they naturally are, because that's where life force begins to leak. So she was doing the things that were conducive to her gifts. And again, it's very sad when you see someone so young die. It's an awful thing. It also made me think about another famous face, another person who died at 27, who had a very expressive earth mouth, who was Jimi Hendrix. So Jimi Hendrix had a very full mouth, but he was another prime example of a person who was substance addicted and had a death that was related to an overdose. And I believe it was with heroin. Don't quote me on that. But I think Jimi Hendrix was that way. But again, when they have a big mouth and those sense, that's a big sense signal. The senses, people can be overindulgent in the senses, if they're doing a hard drug or if they're doing something like that. So these are the things that I saw. These are the big dominant components that I wanted you to think about. The last little bit was the gap in her tooth, right? The teeth right here. So that gap in the middle there is a sign of a surplus of Jing. When we see a gap in the teeth, there's spacing. That means constitutional strength, and that's a surplus of it. So that's sort of like an extra Jing marker. People will get that fixed sometimes. But in face reading theory, a gap between the teeth, that's spacing, is actually like a surplus. It means like extra Jing. The pitfall of that is that people with extra Jing oftentimes are heavy-handed with it, because their bodies are usually pretty resilient, and they will play with fire longer than they should, and that can be depleting to them. And in her case, it may have taken her life. That surplus Jing may have contributed to her being a little bit rougher with her life force than she should have been. So that's my read on Amy Winehouse. If there's someone else you'd like me to read, please let me know. Thanks for your time.